Good evening. I'm Ves Quinlin. I would like to share a few old cowboy poems with you this evening. And some of the things about the old-time cowboy, who he was, what he did, how he managed to capture the imagination of so many people for so long, with only 40 or 50 years in his heyday. The heyday of the North American cowboy lasted from about 1850 through 1900. And I often wonder why we've been so fascinated by what he did. It was not that he discovered the West or helped to develop it. Other people did that. It was not that he recognized the potential of the western prairies and the mountains, invested in them and developed them. That was done by Europeans and entrepreneurs. If he didn't do any of these things, then precisely what did he do that captured everyone's imagination? What he in fact did was gathered cattle and trailed them from where they were to where they were needed while the railroads were being built. But perhaps the most important thing he did was he found a way to make a living where he had practically no responsibility for himself. His employer fed him, furnished his horses, even furnished his tobacco. And the work he did was almost pure fun, in spite of the risk and the danger. The other thing he did was created a body of poetry and songs and literature that has had an impact on American movies, American books, even American poetry. The Hollywood version of the cowboy is somewhat distorted. The television version was distorted worse. The cowboys, there were not very many cowboys. There were maybe 200-300 of them at most. They all seemed to know each other. The poetry that they created was an oral poetry, meant to be heard, meant to be spoken, not read. And it traveled through the cowboys from cow camp to cow camp over the years. Many of the cowboys were black sheep from Eastern families. Some of them were immigrants, Irish mostly, and about a third of them were black. They had an open society, an open culture. Nobody asked you where you came from or who you were. They only looked to see if you could do your job, if you took your work seriously, and you were accepted pretty well based on what you could do. The poetry reflects that openness and a great deal of love for the work they did. A lot of the poetry laments the passing of the heyday of the cowboy. A lot of it talks, of course, about horses, cattle. But mostly it's about men. Mostly it's about men who had time to think about things. One of the cowboy poets at the gathering was asked by a newspaper interviewer why he thought cowboys all through the years had written and recited poetry. And he said, well, cowboys is sentimental as hell, and they love to tell lies. So he said, if you dress a lie up with a little bit of poem, nobody can call you an out-and-out liar. There's probably more truth to that than one would think. The other thing I think that had to do with the cowboys was the time. They had a great deal of time, which was another attractive thing about the work. They spent a great deal of time alone. I've selected a few of the poems that I like best from some of the old-time cowboy poets. In 1985, there was a gathering in Elko, Nevada, of a few people, about 40 I guess, who knew the old poems and who had written other poems. The gathering was the idea of Dr. Jim Griffith, who's the director of folk arts, Southwest Folk Arts, the University of Arizona. Nobody knew exactly what was going to happen, but it turned into quite an event. Young people, 20, 30 years old, are still learning these old poems from the 1850s. And old men and young men all remembered the same poem. It was part of the charm of that gathering. It's an interesting phenomenon. One of the greatest of the West's poets was a man named Badger Clark, Charles Badger Clark, South Dakota. And the two poems that I'd like to do for you that are Badger Clark's are not his most popular poems, or the poems most people know. But they're poems that I like because they tend to reveal what Badger Clark was thinking about, the way they lived and the way they did things they thought about. The first poem is called Red Saloon. 'Twas a hole called Red Saloon in Lavaca town. 'Twas an old piano there, blistered, marred, and brown, where a man more battered still, taking drinks for fees, played all night from memory on the yellow keys. Glasses clinked and clashed on the sloppy bar, while that piano's dreamy voice took you out and far, riding old forgotten trails underneath the moon, till you heard a drunken yell back in Red Saloon. Whir a wheel and slap a card, talk of loss and gain, mixed with hum of honeybees down a sunny lane. Glimpses of your mother's face, touch of girlish lips, often made you lose your count as you stacked your chips. Scuffling feet, thud of fists, curses hot as fire, still the music sang of love, longing, lost desire. Dreams that never could have been, joys that couldn't stay, while the man upon the floor wiped the blood away. Then somehow it followed you, slept upon your breast, trailed you out across the range and never let you rest. For days and days you'd hum just one scrap of tune. Funny place for music though, back in Red Saloon. The other poem that Badger Clark did is a poem called The Loco'ed Horse. As I was riding all alone, winking in the noontime glare, I seen a hoss all hide and bone walk around a willow dead and bare. Walk round and round with limp and groan and hunt the shade that wasn't there. Then says I, that sorry steed has been in at the loco weed. Nearby a spreading live oak laid its wide, cool shadow on the ground, but then he knowed that willow's shade was just a little further round. There like a coon his thoughts was treed, since he had at the loco weed. The water trail went winding by, the sweet brown grass furred every slope, and he was gaunt and starved and dry, yet on his ghostly picket rope. Led round and round he still must try that hopeless circle of his hope. He didn't think of drink or feed, since he had at the loco weed. A playful wild bunch topped the hill and stared with eyes all impish bright, and whinnied to him sweet and shrill, and flung their heads and loped from sight. But from his everlasting mill they couldn't make him stray a mite. He never seen their gay stampede, for he had at the loco weed. When next that range I had to ride, beneath his willow tree he lay, just worn out hooves and faded hide and big black birds that flopped away. And yet I reckon that he died still hopeful, happy, who can say? Sometimes I think I mostly need to eat some sort of loco weed.